Her coat crashed onto his keyboard before she ever learned who owned the system beneath her feet. In a corridor of concrete and fluorescent light, a new vice president swept in with designer polish and platform confidence. She spoke like the world owed her a runway. She did not ask a name. She ordered coffee. She dropped her coat onto a keyboard that had kept the company alive for years. In that moment, without a word, the stage was set. Her first mistake was not arrogance, it was ignorance. He was listed as infrastructure lead. That was the line on the chart, not on the funding memos, not on the press releases, not on the wall of glossy portraits. He preferred it that way. He built the command stack that spanned 6 platforms and 3 acquisitions. He maintained the artery that moved data and authority. He was the last surviving architect from the old company, a name you would not find on a pitch deck, a signature buried in continuity documents, the custodian the building had already learned to obey. Years earlier, in a small room near a river, the door wore a paper sign that read, "Please knock." The elevator was broken again. There were no security scanners, only a keypad with a stubborn memory. The company was 2 months from shutdown. Cloud bills loomed like winter. Their lead developer was gone. Their product lead was splitting time elsewhere. They did not hire a savior. They contracted one. He arrived with a chair of his own and a terminal window. 12 hours later, there was a heartbeat. 36 hours later, there was redundancy. He did not leave. He did not pitch. He rebuilt. He rebuilt because control lives in the places no one glamorizes, in call stacks and authorization chains, in vendor clauses and exception paths that are labeled temporary and quietly left in place. He layered compliance like lacquer across borders. He designed authentication relays that satisfied auditors in 4 countries. He engineered modular routing that could flex and fail without collapse. And when the finance team asked for a way to spin off liabilities, he gave them something other than a workaround. He gave them a mirror. On paper, it was a white label partner. In filings, it bore a name, Ellenton Systems. In reality, it was his silent keystone, nested among vendor dependencies, cross-signed and invisible by design. Through that shell, he held the custodial keys. He wrote a governance clause into the original continuity, mirrored through a trust he controlled. It did not ring bells. It did not light screens. It simply sat there inside the bones of the company, patient, legal, and live. Founders rotated. Boards changed. Investors arrived. Desks became nicer. But the foundation remained, and its root credential still knew one name: E. Maddox. She never looked for it. She never Googled it. She never asked who had built the floor she walked on. She inherited dashboards and demanded speed. She turned off multi-factor to rush an onboarding. She insisted on unlocked environments to impress a vendor. She pushed exception after exception to quiet the friction that protects real systems. She had access. He had authority. He watched and he logged. There is a difference between an override and an ambush. Clause 18C was not in the board-approved wiki. It lived in the ink of the first incorporation when the company had 3 employees and 1 bank account that sometimes trembled. It spelled out a simple rule. Any direct bypass of custodial credentials would trigger a failsafe. Not a shutdown, not a headline, a mirror. Stored procedures would quietly record, timestamp, and transmit to a vault she did not know existed. That vault was tied to Ellenton Systems. His vault. His keys. When she routed a credential chain through the super admin pathway without the layered pass, the mirror woke up. From that moment, her every digital movement was doubled. Every login captured, every IP resolved, every escalation hashed. She moved fast. The system moved faster. By week 2, the logs showed 5 distinct policy violations. By week 3, she had rewritten an escalation path to remove compliance review for major vendor swaps. By week 4, she began planning a migration without consulting the architects who carried the blueprint. And then, with a flourish, she entered her own name into the permissions core, naming herself sole operational lead over an integration that touched high-risk client data. The logic paused, examined, and fired. There were no blinking alarms, no dramatic displays, just gray options that would not click and edits that would not save. A governance freeze engaged. The ethics continuity mandate had been written when the first investor joined. It required an immediate halt to operational changes if a credential breach struck at delegation. Review would proceed under the designated custodian. That designation had not changed since 2015. The system did not care about titles. It cared about entries in a ledger. It recognized a name and enforced the rule. The hallway carried her voice as she called the chief technology officer. Messages stacked, screenshots traveled. One line sat at the center of a dashboard like a verdict. Governance lock active, per clause 18C. See custodian on record. Primary custodian, E. Maddox. She was stunned. She argued. She tried to dismiss a clause she had never read as outdated or irrelevant. She ran into a boundary older than her tenure. You inherited systems you did not build. This is one of them. That was the answer she received. Late that night, the chair of the board reached out. He was a man who measured language and did not waste it. "We need to talk." He asked if the name was an error. It was not. He asked for clarity. He received architecture and law. The trust deed, the mirrored clause, the chain of title and indemnity nested inside the compliance envelope. He received a ledger of violations, 10 pages of timestamps and traces, each unapproved escalation tied to a login, each breach pinned to a keystroke. "Why enforce it now?" he asked. "Because rules matter most when someone believes they do not," came the answer. Systems do not ask permission to respond. They respond. The boardroom that followed smelled of polish and capital. The secretary's notes read, "Emergency session." Riley sat at the head like any other Tuesday. She did not sense the currents until the chair spoke the clause aloud. The silence that followed was not angry. It was procedural. Legal memos slid forward. Hands rose one by one. Credential reversion passed with near unanimity. No voices raised, no threats. Her admin token was scrubbed. Contracts she had rushed were frozen. Escalations she had pushed without review were rolled back. He did not take her chair. He did not pose for a photograph. He appointed someone else. Her name was Olivia Tran. Quiet, precise. She had lived inside the infrastructure team for years. She had built parts of the machine that others took for granted. She wore competence lightly. She listened. The first week under Olivia was triage. The team swept every credential Riley had touched. Logs were archived and locked. Vendor contracts were paused or voided if they jumped the fence of review. Compliance checkpoints returned to the rhythm of the work. The company called vendors who had been ghosted and consultants who had been dismissed. The auditors re-entered meetings without being told to stay in their lane. Systems reverted to pre-breach configurations. An internal memo made it official with a single cold line. All operational changes made without delegated authority under Clause 18C are nullified. No exceptions. No one cheered. They exhaled. Threads stopped bursting with confusion. Deployments stopped failing in the night. The machine hummed in a lower, steadier key. There was no press release, no victory lap. Just the return of precision and discipline. The quiet virtues that had kept the company alive when the rooms were smaller and the doors stuck. 6 weeks later, a meeting began without theater. The board chair reviewed projections. The general counsel tracked risk. The auditor attended in person. Olivia typed notes with the focus of someone who knew how much failure costs. At the far end sat Riley, invited as an observer. No title on the glass, no token in the system. She faced the silence she had once filled with performance. A folder slid across the table. Inside were her footprints. Every override, every escalation, every quiet assumption she'd made about ownership. No speeches, no dramatic monologue, just one sentence from the custodian, as simple as a door closing. "Welcome to my company." It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. Power isn't what the badge claims. Power is what the system remembers. Months later, a link arrived with no message. A new profile, curated headshot, shiny headline, advising founders on operational discipline and leadership structure. The comments were polite and polished. Brilliant mind, visionary leader. Then one line appeared from the lead counsel, sitting there like a scalpel on white linen. "Start by learning who owns the infrastructure next time." No emojis, no clap hands, just truth sharpened to a point. This wasn't the story of a trap built to make someone fail. It was a memory device, the memory of a company that once stared at a dead terminal and chose to build a living system with rules that could outlast any single personality. A lesson about resumes versus root credentials, about the gap between access and authority, about the quiet custodians who lay cable under desks and tuck clauses into charters because they know that someday someone will forget to ask, who actually holds the keys? In the end, there were no fireworks, no viral moment, no dramatic walkout. Just a ledger, a vote, and a system that did exactly what it was designed to do. It refused to turn the company into a stage for a one-person show. It handed control back to the architecture and to the people who respected it. And it left a permanent reminder in search results and in memory. People remember the silence in the boardroom. They remember the hands that rose. They remember the day a career ended with a keystroke. She thought he was the IT guy. He was the founder she bypassed, and the custodian the system recognized all along. So now I'm wondering, was that justice or overkill? If you were in that boardroom, would you have voted to let her stay, or watched the system do exactly what it did? Tell me how you see it.